Data strategy is a complex topic. What is your simplified frame of attacking the problem? How do you go about thinking about data strategy for a big brand like Edgewell?
We kind of break it down into three pillars, I'd say. Customer data strategy, you have a consumer or say marketing data strategy, and then you have a financial S&OP data strategy. And the beauty is that the convergence of these three data strategies, right? Because that's how you optimize your mix. That's how you drive an omni-channel solution. That's how you make sure that you're optimizing your ROI.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Intentwise Expert Connect podcast, where we bring industry leaders, practitioners to learn from their real-world experiences. And today, it's my pleasure to have Nathan Moran as my guest. Nathan is the Senior Director of Growth Strategy and Analytics at Edgewell Brands. Nathan, how are you?
I'm good. Delighted to be here. Thank you.
I'm going to have Nathan kind of share more details about his current role, but what I'm excited about is personally, we and at Intentwise, we spend a lot of time talking to brands, talking to them about their data strategy, and Nathan is someone that has lived and breathed it for almost a decade here. And we'll learn more about that in a moment, but I couldn't be more excited. Nathan, why don't you please take a moment, introduce yourself and tell us kind of your specific role and what it entails at Edgewell.
Yeah, cool. And again, thanks for having me. Nate Moran. I lead up our growth strategy and analytics team at Edgewell Personal Care. We have 15 plus brands across a global stage, operating within, various categories like shave, sun care, wipes, men's grooming, feminine care. And so kind of leading up a lot of our data and analytics initiatives from a commercial front, anything from engineering to BI and analytics, but then also some of the e-commerce functions, so how we think about our digital shelf and the insights around our digital consumer journey, and even into performance marketing. So brought an in-house team to focus on performance marketing, to be data driven, and to essentially kind of power a lot of how we show up and grow our share of voice in the e-commerce space. So that's a little bit of background about me and where I come from.
That's awesome. And we'll get into a lot more about work stuff, but you were a competitive soccer player going to college.
Once upon a time.
Once upon a time. What was your position, by the way?
I was a goalkeeper. Yeah, it was definitely something that set me apart from a lot of the other folks. So I guess I know if there's any parallels to this is I like to lead from the back, right? Making sure that I can see all the moving pieces on the field and be able to advise and make, the smart decision from behind. And so I think that's, I don't know if there's any parallel to that in what we're discussing today, using data, cracking the e-commerce code. But yeah, those are, I don't know, 10 plus years ago when I was playing competitively.
My daughter plays soccer, and I love the what you just framed up, which is sitting back and watching the field. And I agree. Like a lot of the data work is probably has a similar feel to it. You're probably serving a whole bunch of groups within the organization. Let's dive into that a little bit, right? With the role that you had, and by the way, you worked at Unilever, you work with Novel Brands, and I think this conversation would love to draw on your entire experience in e-commerce. Let's begin with just understanding how these data teams were organized. Were you a centralized team in a lot of these places? Were you decentralized? Just walk me through how you were structured and perhaps any insight on plus and minus of the structure.
Yeah, definitely. If you think about our organization, it's fairly large, right? We're kind of a mid-cap company. We have a lot of brands that we support. We might not be at the Unilever or the L'Oreal size, but we are still big enough to be fairly matrixed. And with that, we do kind of have somewhat of a hub and spoke model from how we think about being market led. So we have a IT kind of center of excellence that focuses on a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the ingestion, onboarding of data from an enterprise perspective to keep us all grounded. So that way, through our CFO, we can kind of make sure that we're all leveraging the same data sets. I'd say then it kind of goes into more of a commercial versus supply chain has their own set of teams,
Mhm.
data and analytics wise. So, I lead up our commercial North America data and analytics org,
Mhm.
um, which is probably the largest devoted data and analytics team, just considering the importance around our business. And, we're 50% of the total business worldwide. Um, but then supply chain has a team. We also have international markets, right? So Europe and APAC, South America. We have various teams scattered throughout there. But like I said, we all touch base, and we have a center of excellence and making sure that we're all leveraging internal data sets that are the same. But I think where the creativity comes in is where say like our commercial DNA team might be onboarding a lot of external data sets too, and then it becomes a whole vast ocean of how we think about bringing it all together. So that's kind of how we operate today.
Yeah, so it sounds like a really a hybrid model where there's a central component and then there's these distributed components, right? And
That's
I
correct.
want to get into data strategy in a moment here, but you touched on this a little bit, like for example, Edgewell, the complexity of Edgewell, for example, you've got like 15 sub brands, you've got global scale. Talk about channels, right? Like, what are the channels that you're all in? Like, how big is e-commerce as a function of that to the extent that you can share?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely something that's evolving. Obviously, as we think about digital penetration being a big goal of the company, and how the categories are evolving with the consumers and their preferences. But just to kind of level set from a global perspective, a lot of our business is actually wet shave focused. So, our Schick master brand and some of the sub brands underneath of it, as well as Wilkinson Sword. So we operate shave in almost a lot of countries, and then we do have more of a presence in select countries, specifically North America, where sun care like Banana Boat, Hawaiian Tropic, and our men's grooming brands might have a bigger presence in. And so that said, speaking for North America, we operate in your big FMCG players, the mass retail like Walmart, Target. We have Amazon as a core focus. And then, what's interesting is, our shave brands do really well in our drug channel retailers like CVS, Walgreens, and then obviously grocery with the big players like Kroger, et cetera. So those are kind of the channels that we have a lot of presence in at the moment.
It's just getting into data strategy a little bit. Data strategy is a complex topic, and given your complexity, there's a lot to it, right? So, what is your simplified frame of attacking the problem? How do you go about thinking about data strategy for a big brand like Edgewell?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's kind of like two components probably to this question, and then within each of those, it's definitely interesting. There's like we start with the problems that we're solving, right? And then we get into like how do you build a robust data strategy off of that. And I think the problems that we're solving, right, are how do we manage our enterprise mix, and it's a lot of it's been kind of broken out as its own subjects like SRGM, or we call it strategic revenue growth management. Other companies might call it net revenue management. The idea of this is super important. It's very data driven. Like, how are we looking at our channel mix, our retailer mix, our brand mix, our SKU mix when we're balancing thousands of SKUs every day going in, selling in, selling out to consumers, all around variable things like price, promotion, the volume and the velocity behind each of these.
Mhm.
It all plays a massive role in terms of how you net out from a gross margin and a net sales perspective. You have to make sure that you're focused on the right mix. So that managing the mix is one problem that we're solving. The second is like applying that in a similar vein to how we accelerate omnichannel being a critical focus for the company, and where all of the growth is coming. We must kind of win in this e-commerce environment and build our data strategy around that first, being digitally led, because we know that's where a lot of the growth is coming from. The others, it gets into marketing effectiveness and incrementality, which is at the convergence of this whole omni-channel piece. And then, lastly, I'd kind of think about, our job is to solve data strategy, adoption, and education. for how to equip a lot of our sales and marketers to be more data driven. So that's kind of how we're thinking about, the problems that we face and what our team is tackling now. How that translates into a data strategy, we kind of break it down into three pillars, I'd say. Customer data strategy, you have a consumer or say marketing data strategy, and then you have a financial kind of S&OP data strategy. And the beauty is that the convergence of these three data strategies, right? Because that's how you optimize your mix. That's how you drive an omni-channel solution. That's how you make sure that you're optimizing your ROI. So I think that's kind of, we break it down into that, and we definitely talk about the specifics of each of those data strategies, and I'd love to, but it's definitely how we use all three of those together to tackle some of the problems.
This is great. I mean, I've got some visuals playing out in my head as you speak. So let me just, if I were to play this back to you, a broad set of problems you're trying to solve: enterprise mix, followed by marketing effectiveness. I heard the term incrementality. We are going to talk more about that
Of course. How
in a
could we not?
moment. And then overall education around all of this, so that I'm assuming like the focus there is like how do you just make the enterprise much more data agile. I also like the three things you mentioned, which is you've got a customer focused strategy, marketing focused strategy, and finance focused strategy. I love that. And of course, we are going to a place where, especially in e-commerce, like those cannot all be siloed. They so influence each other. So I also like the fact that you're thinking deeply about convergence of these three things. Did I capture it right?
100%, right. And I think I kind of snuck one more in there, which is accelerating omnichannel as kind of like a
Omnichannel, that's right.
goal. But like at the end of the day, if you're getting all of these other things that you kind of mentioned, right, you are accelerating your omnichannel journey. And I think that's the space that we live in. It's living and breathing, it's changing every day. And it's something that I think about all the time is like your in-stock development at your local store actually impacts your e-commerce touch point for that consumer at some point in that journey, right? And so it all has to come together. And we're at a very interesting time because teams have historically kind of played in their own playing fields,
Yeah.
but we're starting to open that up, and it's all
Yeah.
powered via data. So
Yeah. Fantastic. Let's talk about incrementality. I look, personally, I used to run a data team and an online marketing team in my previous job before I started this business. So I've been hearing and doing something about figuring out incrementality for the last 15, 20 years. In my head, I still think it's really an unsolved problem, and there's a spectrum of, how solved it is versus not. And people, are at different stages in that spectrum, and they keep going at it all the time, right? I'm actually curious, where are you with this? And not just in the current role, but in your previous roles combined. Have you solved the problem?
uh,
Are you getting at it?
yeah, I think I was just talking to someone else about this. There is kind of like it's tough. There's no perfect solution here, right? There is no perfect market for this, which keeps us busy as data professionals in this space. That's for sure. Um, and it really depends on the approach, right? Like, some might see incrementality as like sales incrementality, and others might think about it like, from an upper funnel perspective, how you're bringing in more consumers into the journey, but maybe not converting per se. That could be considered incrementality, right? And so I think that you're kind of seeing a lot of the chatter. It comes up, it hits in waves, right? But there's a lot of chatter right now, actually, even in the LinkedIn environment, et cetera, around brand versus performance marketing.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious because it kind of comes and goes and it comes and goes. And it's definitely something to think about because there's a lot of research that tells us brand building, is a must have, and it goes a long way for how you actually win market share and build a brand. And so,
And
but
also the other challenge you have is between brand and performance marketing. There's always no direct signals that you can tie together, right? And that
not
compounds the problem.
always. Yeah, for sure. Because, we're very decentralized these days with the cookie deprecation and, PII data is limited. The channels are mixing towards bigger retailer environments as opposed to direct to consumer dominated environments. And so we're very fragmented, and everybody knows that. And um, when we kind of get scared of the topic of like how do we piece it all together, we kind of go back into like this pointing fingers match between brand and performance marketing. It's just funny to kind of see it, but you need both, right, at the end of the day, and a good balance. So kind of bringing it back to your point around incrementality, do I feel fully comfortable around it? It's one of those ones that I continue to think about and have different perspectives on as I learn. And I'm constantly learning in this space, which is what I love about the digital and the e-commerce space. And so we have signals. Is it perfect? No, but we try to triangulate these signals to make the best sense of the data and how we action it. Because it's more about the action you take and less about the retrospective result, right? Because the evolution of the game is changing.
And so just to peel the layer a little bit, right? Like on the topic of incrementality, has that translated into certain use cases where you track some charts and metrics on a regular basis? And has that translated into certain type of ongoing analysis? Just any color, anything you can share there would be.
Yeah, for sure. We kind of think about I'm going to take a step back and talk about our measurement playbook. And we like to break it down into, 3 areas. And it's focused on like our MMMs, because we know that at the end of the day, with the, decentralization of, all of these consumer journeys and touch points, is that we still need to have a better understanding of what channels are working better than others. And that's where we start our journey. And these are, hard to kind of, automate on an ongoing basis. Typically, it's a point and shoot model. You're kind of running it standalone. You refresh it later on. So you have to fine tune it. Feature engineering. There's a lot that goes into that. And so we focus on MMM as it pertains to how we allocate our dollars from a national top-down perspective. And then as you get into more of the retailer specific space, you and the retail media networks, you start to get into things like iROAS, which is being thrown around right now. And that's focusing on we get a little bit more real-time signal there, and we're able to kind of track various metrics to kind of come up with a, best approach around what's driving the incremental dollar or consumer within that journey. So we do partner, with a provider of ours that, has been helping us in this journey. That is able to be an index for us, because when I took over the performance marketing team, my goal was to shift away from just solely looking at ROAS as that's where you can kind of really just game the system. And you could just hit all your branded keywords, make your ROAS look. We've talked about this. Right? It's like you can game the system, get the ROAS to look really high, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's driving incrementality. And so again, there's no perfect model here because you don't have enough signals to have it. But at least we look at it and we're optimizing in real time. It's more about the go forward than the retrospective look back. So that's kind of how we're using iROAS. And then obviously there's the new clean room stuff, right? Like which I know you talk about all the time. It's kind of the next piece, right, of attribution. And so we look at clean rooms as kind of our third prong, MMMs, iROAS, and incrementality, and then clean rooms to essentially help us look at effectiveness and overlap and audience-based cohorts. It's the triangulation of these 3 concepts that actually allows us to feel more comfortable about the direction of the step forward we're going to take next.
Makes sense. And in terms of the makeup of the team that is analyzing all this data, have you got people that are kind of machine learning experts on the team doing a bunch of analysis? Because like you pointed out, like a lot of this stuff, you can't just automate. These are point-in-time exercises. Problem statements change, inputs change. You learn a ton. You test. So just curious what the makeup of the team is that supports this kind of analytics.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And I think this is the beauty of how we formed the team here, is that the performance marketing team sits side by side with the data and analytics team. So you have domain experts, but then you also have technical experts, and these folks kind of come together in that space. So yes, we do have a somewhat small but mighty like growth marketing analytics team that is a data scientist and um, someone who's focused on all of this measurement playbook here,
Yeah.
and pulling it together. So, but the thing is we at our scale we still have to leverage our providers, right? As you would know, because you are a provider to many brands like ours, and so we have to leverage, say the IROAS or the incrementality, because that's more scalable for us. And then maybe we bring the MMMs in house and we're running those in house. And then, the clean rooms, we do a lot of that work in house as well. And so I'd say two of the three of these things we've kind of are working real time with the teams to optimize the performance marketing teams to actually take these insights back while we're in flight and then changing, which is way better than where we come from with the traditional agency approach, right? The traditional agency approach is like, okay, you do the pre-work up front, the campaign takes flight, and then you don't get a wrap report until like a month later after the campaign is wrapped. So we are very much under the operating model of we're looking at this daily and we're pivoting daily. So that's the fun part about the roles and how we've formed the team. So
Tell me a little bit about your data stack. Like, what choices have you made?
data stack. So as it pertains to kind of like our marketing
Yeah, sure.
stack,
Like,
or
just
more
like in
so.
terms of like, data warehouses,
Okay.
and also if you can touch on, and this is something I want to spend a little bit of time on is, as part of that, how are you thinking about Gen AI? But let's just start with the basics, right? Like, you know, data warehouses, reporting tools, whatnot, like anything you can share around that would be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So essentially we are, if you kind of break down our stack, we rely on our data aggregators,
Sure.
our SaaS and our DaaS, data as a service providers, and our internal data sets that we get. We kind of talked about how we leverage our IT teams to kind of get a lot of the internal data staged. But that's all warehoused in kind of like, or hosted in our Azure environment. We have a Snowflake layer that mostly is where all the beauty is happening. And that's been a game changer for our organization because we focus less on like the actual data, like the ETL processes, right? Where you have to have engineering troubleshoot with their engineering, tweak it here and there. It's just living and breathing, right? Our SaaS and our DaaS providers just do the snow shares directly into our environments. It takes out a lot of the excess work that historically has had to be done, specifically around like, SFTP exchanges, APIs,
Yep.
all of that stuff. So I see that being kind of we were very forward looking when we made the stack change around Snowflake, and that's really paid dividends. And then we use Power BI for kind of our front end visualization of a lot of the reporting. And then within kind of the Snowflake layer, there's obviously a lot of last mile type of analytics, I would call it. And that's where we are leveraging like Python, R on occasion. And we also have Alteryx for, some last mile reporting that maybe we need to get data or an insight out to a team really fast. And kind of break down the models that we have, right? Where like you give it to an engineer, they're going to want perfection. So we have some front end BI and analytics folks who are answering those questions. The sales team needs to know it now. So how do you get that insight to them quickly? So we do use Alteryx still at the end of the day to get the last mile analytics done. So that's the stack. That's the under the hood.
Gotcha. Super interesting. Gen AI, is this a board level and a C-level conversation at your company? And what are you hearing? What demands come to you? And then let's talk about your point of view on, where Gen AI is taking us.
Yeah, Gen AI is definitely the hot topic going through its standard, hype cycle curve right now. It's definitely a C-suite conversation that's happening constantly, and it's applied in a lot of different places, and we already have good use cases on it. I think the thing is that It's not a blanket solve for everything, but there are particular use cases in which we can apply it to. And we've already done that for SEO. We've leveraged it for search engine optimization. There's definitely a lot of applicability. I don't know if we need to, force it into every behavior or everything just yet. I think the future of this is really where, at least in my world, from a data perspective, is that Gen AI isn't a solve for a lot of the traditional AI just yet, right? And
Yeah.
you can't just ask it to an AI chatbot to forecast what your next week's volume is going to be, right? Like you actually have to figure out how all of these come together, and perhaps we will get there one day, right? Where Gen AI is running their own AI underneath, and there's probably models out there that are getting to that. But right now, I think how we think about it is like very specific use cases, like search engine optimization, conversational AI internally. We also are thinking about it once we get to our beautiful semantic model layer that people can interact with our semantic models via natural language, and perhaps that takes down the need for BI and self-serve reporting if they could just ask it questions.
Yeah,
That's something we're thinking about for sure.
got you. And when you say SEO, can you just explain that a bit more? Like, are you talking about content on your D2C site? Or are you talking about product content across channels? Just any additional color on that would be awesome.
Yeah, both. Anytime any place that we are landing like a product detail page, where there's specific requirements, where there's specific ways that we want to write a description about the brand in the brand's voice. And that's what's cool is like we've even trained the model to write in Banana Boat's like branded voice. So that way it's not off script for brand. And so but then also we're plugging in search engine keywords, optimized keywords. Can we get to a point where it's optimizing in real time against seasonal keywords and other things? And again, there's a lot of players in the space now that are popping up specifically around this, but we actually did create this use case in-house right off the back, so that was pretty cool to see.
A lot of our audience are big on Amazon and Walmart e-commerce. I'm curious, like, does Amazon in particular drive a certain kind of demand on your overall data stack that's different than, let's say, other channels? If so, what has been the implication of that for you?
For sure. It's funny you say this because I feel like a lot of the internal teams often say, "Oh, you work so much on the Amazon data." Well, there's a reason for that, and you would know, right? Is Amazon gives you a lot of data. They have APIs for almost every data feed out there that exists in their environment, and it's hundreds, if not sure there's thousands. I haven't even counted recently. Maybe, do you know of API tables that are sitting out there in the environment, whether it's on the advertising or the vendor central side? And so we've are using obviously some tech providers in between to get to these data sets and expose them, but it is a lot of our data, and then not to mention the third parties that operate on top of it, the market share providers, et cetera, that also provide us very granular levels of data. And I think you're going to see more and more retailers follow suit. We're seeing Walmart follow suit. We're seeing, I'm sure Target's not far behind, where they're going to give more data. Now, whether they monetize it or not, that's a whole different discussion, and something that us as brands feel pressure now to make sure that we're getting the most juice out of these data sets, because we're paying for them now. It's a profit center for the retailers.
If you can just allow me to put a frame on these different types of data, right? Do you put them in like 4 to 5 buckets of all the critical data sets you collect? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think this is kind of where we get into like the customer data strategy I kind of mentioned and before. And customer meaning for us, our direct customers are retailer, right? And so the way I think about this is kind of, we collect our retailer data, and we're doing this through it's because of the granularity that the retailers are providing, like the Amazons and the Walmarts of the world, where you can get to product, geo or store location by day, sales, inventory. These are all signals that us as brands, even though we're not the ones directly selling it,
Yeah.
we need to know that, right?
Yeah.
That's the way that we can actually test and learn, experiment, optimize. To have that level of granularity is super imperative. And then you kind of mix the next piece, which is like retail media, right? So the retail media network, and they intentionally separate these ecosystems, right? They make it somewhat difficult, but we can get to product and campaign and day level over here as well. So the beauty is actually when you start to merge these data sets together.
Yeah.
And that goes back to like kind of how I made the parallel to RGM in the space is like you're managing your mix.
Yeah.
It's the same game. It's just different, different styles or different flavors, right? You're managing your mix of advertising, promotion. Are you hitting the right in stock on the item when you do those things? Are you setting up smart rules? I'd say we're even, you use some digital shelf tools, right? In stock and availability is shown on the sites, right? If you're filtered to a specific zip or store level, it'll tell you how much is in stock. So that's how I've been segmenting our customer data strategy. It's like our retailer data, the vendor data, our retail media network data, our digital shelf data, and then we can't ignore the syndicated category data that we get from the bigger providers like the Circanas and the Nielsen's of the world.
And plus, you have your own brand data that is probably fairly complex and sizable as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. It becomes less important though. And I think this is a key shift in the industry as we kind of mentioned before, where is like for brands like the categories that we operate in, we own less and less of our data than the typical bigger, higher price point brands that still have direct to consumer channels.
Interesting.
We're fast moving consumer goods. People are buying us in baskets, meaning they're buying sunscreen when they go to the drugstore to pick up, their other products there, their cosmetics or whatever. And so we're actually subject to collecting a lot of our retailer data. Like that is our new 1P data set, right?
Yeah.
The retailer data, the granular retailer data is our 1P data for our brands. It's just how about you use it, how you cohort it, and how you leverage it. Doesn't diminish the need for our consumer data strategy and how we think about 1P data collection, using that to activate, to build lookalike models. There's a lot of social and consumer listening that we do, but that's what I say is like this all has to converge to be smarter about how you think about these things.
Among a number of things here, Nathan, one thing I can relate to is owning the data and analytics function in a public company, where you've got some answers to provide every quarter or so. But, and that experience taught me a lot. I just want to ask you, are there some failures around data strategy or implementation that you've learned a ton from?
Yeah. I like to think that there are no failures. But the reality is, as you kind of mentioned, it's not that we're outnumbered as data and analytics professionals in these organizations, but the business moves really quick and it's centered around our sales and marketers for the most part. Which means that, by the time us as data folks build something fancy and shiny and cool,
Late.
that it's too late. Yeah, it's the classic. It's kind of like R&D. Like you find out you're trying to build something. It takes you 2 years in a big company. It takes you 2 years to turn around a new product, and by that time you're too late to the market. Right? It's like anything. So I think for us, it's the important lesson that I've had here is that you need to stay close to the business. And I think that's the beauty of our team actually reporting through the business side and not necessarily through like a centralized perspective, is that we are embedded in the business results. We are taking action in real time, and we have to balance the quick wins with the long-term building. And that I've made very clear up front. It's easy to hoard information.
Yeah.
And it's harder to democratize it. So
No, that's such a great point. a little while back had drawn a visual of like, you know, some data projects tend to be long and time intensive. That's the nature of it, right? But if that's all we did, uh, the business, the stakeholders will be like, what the heck are you doing? You provided no value to me in the last 6 months. So that balance, like you pointed out, of like incremental value balance with long-term strategic investments. One, critical. Two, hard to do. Three, you just need a complete organizational support all the way from the top to make that happen.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's a great point. One other topic I want to touch on is just skills and people. I think data and analytics as a realm has always been short on skills. It doesn't matter where you look, which industry you look at. And I think it's particularly true in our space in e-commerce just because things are moving so fast, right? So I want to ask you, like, and you have had a very interesting kind of a fairly accelerated trajectory, and you've been in e-commerce, I think, throughout your career, I think. I'm curious, what would your advice be to e-com professionals or people considering e-com? And where are the opportunities that they should really double down on in terms of investment to build their own skills looking forward?
Yeah. From an e-commerce perspective, right? Like the game is, I think the Amazon quote is, right, every day is day one. And you kind of have to treat it that way because the environment changes so rapidly. So one, you have to be open to change, and you have to be open to learning. Because if you don't, if you're not open to these things, the industry is moving faster than you are, and so that's kind of the big thing. But when you think about, I guess, if I reflect on my trajectory and kind of where I see the modern e-commerce professional, is that you have to be data driven, have to, um, especially in a brand or manufacturer side organization. Data driven is what's going to separate you from the traditional organizations. You also have to be, and I guess this is why you need to be open to learning and changing. You have to be a generalist, because it's not a game of how to sell this item to a specific person. A lot of it's algorithmic now. You're selling to a system. Specifically, if you kind of mention Amazon, like they'll take whatever you throw on there, and you need to kind of be data driven to feed the machine per se. But then you also have to understand what is your marketing toolkit that you can leverage. And it's not your traditional marketing, your brand building toolkit. It's more of your performance based toolkit. Like, how are you thinking about the levers that you can pull? And so, it all comes crashing into one spot. So you have to be open to being a generalist in the space.
Fantastic. Any parting advice for brands that are listening to this conversation, Nathan?
Yep. E-commerce is an ecosystem. It's not a channel. It's not a retailer or customer. It's not a retail media network. And I think that's important to understand is it's an ecosystem that's living and breathing. It's the convergence of sales and marketing, data, and to make better decisions in real time. And so I think that's my advice. But it's also my journey. So I look forward to seeing kind of what's next up for the space in the coming months to years. There's going to be a lot of change.
Fantastic. I mean, this has been a great conversation, Nathan. Thank you so much for your insights and sharing your experiences. Yeah, there's so much to be had, and so much seems to be changing ahead. So, to your point, I think change is the constant, and wish you the best.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure.